The first time Brielle Vance saw death up close, she was 7 years old, watching her uncle dig a grave in the red clay earth outside Alamosa, Colorado, and she thought it looked like digging down into the heart of the world itself. Now, 18, she stood in that same cemetery with dirt caked under her fingernails and dust coating her plain cotton dress, her dark hair falling loose from its braid as she shoveled earth over yet another pine box. The year was 1878, and death came easy in these parts, whether from consumption or gunfire, or the simple wearing down of bodies that had lived too hard for too long. Her uncle Augustus had been the town gravedigger for 20 years before a stroke took him 3 months back, and because Brielle had nowhere else to go and no other family to speak of, she had taken up his shovel and his trade, becoming the thing that made the church-going women whisper behind their hands, and the men look past her as though she were already a ghost herself. She finished patting down the earth with the flat of her shovel, wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of one dirty hand, and turned to find the preacher had already gone. They never stayed long, not with her. The sun was beginning its descent behind the San Juan Mountains to the west, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, and Brielle knew she should head back to the small shack at the edge of the cemetery that had been her uncle's and was now hers. But something made her pause. There was a sound carried on the wind, something that did not belong to the evening birdsong or the rustling of the cottonwoods that lined the cemetery's northern edge. Horses moving fast and then gunshots cracking through the quiet like branches breaking. Brielle grabbed her shovel and ran toward the sound without thinking, her boots kicking up dust on the dirt path that led into town. She crested the small rise that separated the cemetery from Alamosa's main street, just in time to see 3 men on horseback thunder past, their faces covered with bandanas, saddlebags bulging with what she assumed was money from the bank. Behind them, the sheriff and 2 deputies were firing wildly, but the outlaws had too much of a lead. One of the bandits turned in his saddle as he rode, firing back, and Brielle watched in horror as one of the deputies went down, tumbling from his horse into the dust. She ran to him without thinking, dropped to her knees beside him even as the sheriff shouted something she could not hear over the pounding of her own heart. The deputy was young, maybe 25, and he was clutching his shoulder where blood was already seeping through his shirt. His face was white with shock and pain. "You will be all right," Brielle said, though she had no idea if that was true. She had seen enough death to recognize it when it was coming, and this man was losing blood too fast. She pressed her hands against the wound, feeling the hot wetness of it, and yelled for someone to get the doctor. The deputy looked up at her with glassy eyes. "The cemetery girl," he muttered, and then he passed out. The doctor came running, his black bag in hand, and shooed Brielle away with impatient gestures. She stood, her hands covered in blood now to match the dirt, and watched as they loaded the deputy onto a makeshift stretcher and carried him toward the doctor's office. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Coleman, tipped his hat to her briefly before mounting his horse again. "Headed up into the mountains after them," he said. "Mexican Pete's gang, I would wager. They have been hitting towns all along the Front Range." Brielle nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched the sheriff and his remaining deputy ride out, then looked down at her hands. The blood was already starting to dry, mixing with the dirt that seemed to be a permanent part of her skin these days. She walked back toward the cemetery slowly, feeling suddenly exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. The shack was cold and dark when she got back. She lit the oil lamp and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, then scrubbed at her hands until they were raw. The water in the basin turned pink, then red, then brown, as the blood mixed with the dirt. She poured it out behind the shack and refilled the basin, washed her hands again, and still she felt filthy. She could not remember the last time she had felt truly clean. That night she dreamed of graves opening up like mouths and swallowing her whole. 3 days later, the sheriff came back alone. His deputy had died of an infection, and Mexican Pete's gang had disappeared into the high country where the law could not follow easily. The whole town turned out for the deputy's funeral, and Brielle dug the grave herself, refusing help from anyone. It was her job, after all, the thing she was good at, the thing that marked her as different, as other, as something to be pitied and avoided in equal measure. She was filling in the grave after the service, working mechanically, when she became aware of someone watching her. She looked up to find a man standing at the edge of the cemetery, half hidden in the shadow of a large cottonwood. He was tall, taller than any man she had seen in town, with broad shoulders and a chest that strained against his buckskin shirt. His hair was dark and fell past his shoulders, and his face was tanned and weathered in a way that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wore a knife on his belt and carried a rifle slung across his back, and there was something about the way he stood utterly still and watchful that reminded Brielle of a wolf. She met his eyes across the distance, and something jolted through her, a recognition of something she could not name. He held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Brielle stood there with her shovel, heart pounding for reasons she did not understand, and watched the space where he had been until the sun began to set, and she had to finish her work in the fading light. She asked about him in town the next day when she went to buy supplies. The mercantile owner, a thin woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had never been anything but coldly polite to Brielle, actually leaned forward with something like interest when Brielle described the man. "That would be Pierce Oakes, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, even though they were alone in the shop. "Mountain man. Comes down from the high country maybe twice a year to trade pelts and buy supplies. Keeps to himself mostly. Some say he is half wild, been living up there alone for going on 10 years. Others say he is hiding from something or someone. Nobody really knows." "Why was he at the funeral?" Brielle asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Henderson shrugged. "Maybe paying respects, maybe just curious. Hard to say with men like that. They do not think the way regular folk do." Brielle bought her flour and beans and salt pork and walked back to the cemetery, her mind churning. She could not stop thinking about the way Pierce Oakes had looked at her, like he was seeing something no one else did. Like she was not just the gravedigger's niece covered in dirt, but something more, something worth noticing. She told herself it did not matter. Men like that did not have time for women like her, and even if they did, what could come of it? She was bound to this cemetery, to this work that nobody else wanted. She was 19 years old and already felt ancient, worn down by grief and loneliness and the weight of all those bodies she had put in the ground. But that night she drew water from the well and heated it over the fire, then filled the tin tub that hung on the wall of the shack. She stripped off her filthy dress and climbed into the water, hissing at the heat of it, and scrubbed at her skin with a bar of lye soap until it hurt. She washed her hair 3 times, working her fingers through the tangles, and only when the water had gone cold did she climb out and dry herself with a rough towel. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror that hung above the wash basin. Her skin was pale from lack of sun on most of her body, her arms and face darker and freckled. She was too thin, her collarbones standing out sharply, but there was a strength in her arms and shoulders from all the digging. Her hair, clean for the first time in weeks, fell in dark waves past her shoulders. Her eyes were gray, like storm clouds, and they looked back at her with a kind of desperate hope that made her angry at herself. "Foolish," she said to her reflection, "foolish girl." But the next day she found herself washing her face and hands before going into town for supplies, and she braided her hair neatly instead of just tying it back with a piece of string. She told herself it was just about having some self-respect, about not letting herself sink completely into the role of the grave-digging hermit everyone thought she was, but she knew she was lying. She was hoping to see him again, and she did. 3 days later, not in town but at the cemetery itself. She was tending to the graves, pulling weeds and straightening wooden markers that had been knocked askew by the wind, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Pierce Oakes standing there, and in the full light of day, he was even more imposing than she remembered. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with arms as thick as tree branches and hands that looked like they could break a man in half. His face was hard-planed and angular, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble, and those eyes, dark brown and intense, fixed on her with that same unsettling focus. "You are the gravedigger," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like it was not used often. "I am," Brielle said, lifting her chin. She was used to judgment, to disapproval, and she was ready to meet it head-on, but Pierce just nodded. "Hard work for anyone, harder for a woman alone." "I manage," Brielle said, her voice sharper than she intended. Pierce was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then he said, "You have dirt on your face." Brielle flushed and raised a hand to her cheek, felt the grit there. Of course she did. She always did, no matter how much she washed. Comes with the job, she said, trying for defiance and landing somewhere closer to resignation. Pierce stepped closer, and Brielle's breath caught in her throat. He was so big, so utterly male, and there was something dangerous about him, something wild that had not been tamed by civilization. But there was something else too, something almost gentle in the way he reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She did not move. Pierce cupped her chin with one large hand, tilting her face up toward his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. With his other hand, he pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and wiped gently at her cheek, removing the smudge of dirt there. "Ah, better," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Brielle's heart stutter. "Why are you here?" she asked, her own voice barely above a whisper. "Came to town for supplies," Pierce said. He had not let go of her chin, and his thumb moved slowly across her jawline, a touch so light she might have imagined it. "Saw you working. Wanted to talk to you." "Why?" Pierce's mouth quirked, just barely, into something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Been asking myself the same thing. Something about you. Been thinking about you since I saw you at the funeral." Brielle's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Nobody had ever talked to her like this, looked at her like this. She had been invisible for so long, and now this mountain man was standing in her cemetery, touching her face, telling her he had been thinking about her. "I am nobody," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Just the gravedigger's niece, covered in dirt all the time. I smell like death." Pierce's expression changed, something fierce and almost angry flashing across his face. "No," he said, his voice hard. "You smell like earth and hard work and something clean underneath, and you are not nobody. I have been watching you, seen how you work, how you do this job that would break most men without complaining, how you handle being alone." "You have been watching me?" Brielle did not know whether to be flattered or frightened. "Some," Pierce admitted. He finally released her chin but did not step back. "I know what it is to be alone, to be the one people whisper about and avoid. Been living in the mountains by myself for 10 years. Come down to town and people look at me like I am some kind of animal. But you look at me like I am a man." Brielle felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she had forgotten it was there. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Pierce was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "I want to see you clean." Brielle blinked, confused. "What?" "You are covered in dirt because you work with the dead," Pierce said. "Because you dig in the earth all day, but underneath that you are something else, something bright. I can see it. Want to wash you clean and show you what I see." Brielle's face flamed. There was nothing improper in his words, not exactly, but the intimacy of them, the tenderness, made her feel more exposed than if he had propositioned her outright. "I do not understand," she said helplessly. "Come with me," Pierce said, "just for today. Let me show you." Every practical instinct Brielle had screamed at her to say no. She did not know this man. He could be dangerous. She had work to do. But something deeper, something that had been starving for years, made her nod. "All right," she said. Pierce's whole face changed. The hardness melted away, and for a moment he looked younger, almost boyish in his pleasure. He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Brielle took it. His hand engulfed hers, warm and solid and real. He led her out of the cemetery, past the shack she lived in, into the trees that marked the edge of the wild country. Brielle followed, her heart in her throat, wondering what she was doing, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the first truly brave choice she had ever made. They walked for perhaps half an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills. Pierce moved with an easy grace despite his size, navigating the rocky terrain without seeming to think about it. Brielle stumbled a few times, unused to this kind of walking, and each time Pierce was there, his hand steadying her, keeping her upright. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing. A stream ran through it, clear and cold from snowmelt higher up in the mountains. The water tumbled over smooth stones, catching the sunlight, and the sound of it was like music. Pierce led her to the edge of the stream, then let go of her hand. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared into the trees. Brielle stood there, bewildered, listening to the water and the wind in the pines. She could not believe she had done this, just walked off with a strange man into the wilderness. If he wanted to hurt her, there would be no one to hear her scream. But somehow, she did not think he would hurt her. There was something in him that called to something in her, a recognition that went beyond words or logic. Pierce came back carrying a pack she had not seen him with before, which meant he must have left it here earlier. He set it down and began pulling things out. A clean towel, a bar of soap that smelled like pine and something else, herbs maybe. A shirt that looked like it would be huge on her but would at least be clean. "What are you doing?" Brielle asked. "Going to wash you clean," Pierce said matter-of-factly. He gestured to the stream. "Water is cold but clean. Soap is good. I make it myself. You wash, I will keep watch, make sure no one bothers you." Brielle stared at him. "You want me to bathe? Here? Yes? That is," Brielle paused, searching for words, "that is very forward." Pierce had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Not trying to be improper. I will turn my back. Just, you have been covered in dirt so long. Want you to remember what it feels like to be clean." Brielle looked at the stream, at the clear water dancing over stones, and felt a powerful longing rise up in her. When was the last time she had been truly clean? Not just scrubbed raw in a tin tub, but actually clean, her whole body fresh and free of grime. She could not remember. "Turn around," she said. Pierce turned immediately, presenting his broad back to her. Brielle watched him for a moment, making sure he would not look, then began to undress with shaking hands. She stripped down to her chemise and drawers, could not quite bring herself to go further, and waded into the stream. The cold water hit her like a shock, so cold it stole her breath, but there was something bracing about it, something that made her feel suddenly, intensely alive. She bent and splashed water on her face, her arms, felt the dirt and dust sluicing away. She reached for the soap Pierce had left on the bank and began to scrub at her skin, working up a lather that smelled like the forest itself. "You all right?" Pierce called, his back still turned. "Yes," Brielle said, and she was. She was better than all right. She was alive in a way she had not been in months, maybe years. She dunked her head under the water, let the current pull at her hair, and when she came up gasping, she felt new-made, cleansed of something deeper than just dirt. She washed until her fingers pruned and her skin was pink from scrubbing, until she could not remember the last time she had felt this clean. Then she waded out of the stream, teeth chattering, and wrapped herself in the towel Pierce had left. It was softer than anything she owned, worn but well cared for. "I am decent," she called. Pierce turned around, and the look on his face when he saw her made Brielle's breath stop in her chest. He looked at her like she was something precious, something miraculous, and there was such naked longing in his expression that she felt it like a physical touch. "Light," he said softly. "Knew it was there. You are light." Brielle did not know what to say to that. She stood there shivering in her wet undergarments with the towel wrapped around her shoulders and felt more seen than she had ever been in her life. Pierce stepped forward and handed her the shirt. "Put this on. Your clothes are dirty and it is too cold for you to stand around wet like that." Brielle took the shirt and retreated behind a tree to change. The shirt was indeed huge on her, falling almost to her knees, but it was warm and clean and smelled like Pierce, like leather and pine and something distinctly male. She emerged from behind the tree, her dirty dress bundled in her arms, to find Pierce building a small fire. "Come here," he said, gesturing to a spot near the flames. "Get warm." Brielle sat, and Pierce sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire, listening to the stream. "Why did you really bring me here?" Brielle asked finally. Pierce was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Been alone a long time. 10 years since I came up into these mountains. Had a wife before, down in Texas. She died in childbirth and the baby with her. I could not stay after that. Could not stand being around people, around life. Came up here to be alone with the dead parts of myself." Brielle felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm sorry," Pierce shrugged. "Long time ago now, but I got used to being alone. Thought I preferred it. Then I came down to town 3 days ago and saw you. The cemetery girl, covered in dirt, putting a man in the ground like it was nothing. And there was something about you, something that called to me. You work with death every day, same as I have been living with it every day, but you are not dead inside. I could see it. There is light in you, life. and I wanted it. Wanted to be near it. Does that make sense? Yes, Brielle said softly. It made perfect sense. She had thought herself dead inside too, going through the motions of living without really feeling anything. But sitting here by this fire with this strange, intense man, she felt something stirring in her chest, something that might have been hope. Tell me about yourself, Pierce said, how you came to be the Gravedigger. So Brielle told him. She told him about her parents dying when she was 6, about going to live with her uncle Augustus, who had never married and did not know what to do with a child, about growing up in the cemetery, playing among the headstones, learning to dig graves before she was old enough to understand why someone might find that strange, about her uncle's stroke 3 months ago, how he had lingered for a week before dying, and how she had buried him herself because there was no one else to do it, about taking over his work because she had nowhere else to go and no other skills to speak of. The people in town tolerate me, she said, but they do not like me. I make them uncomfortable. I'm a reminder of death, of mortality. They would rather pretend I do not exist. Their loss, Pierce said firmly. You are the bravest woman I have ever met. Brielle laughed, a bitter sound. Brave? I hide in a cemetery and dig holes in the ground. You survived, Pierce said. You take care of the dead with dignity. You do hard work without complaining. That is brave. Brielle looked at him, this mountain man who had appeared in her life like something out of a dream, and felt something settle inside her, something that had been restless and aching for as long as she could remember. What happens now? She asked. Pierce met her eyes. That depends on you. I leave tomorrow, head back up into the high country, but I want to see you again, want to come back for you, if you will let me. I do not even know you, Brielle said, but there was no conviction in her voice. So we get to know each other, Pierce said simply. I can come down from the mountains once a month, court you proper-like, give you time to decide if you could stand to be with a man like me. A man like you, Brielle repeated. What kind of man is that? One who has been half wild for 10 years, who lives in a cabin so far from civilization it takes 2 days to reach town, who has scars inside and out from things he has seen and done, who is offering you nothing but a hard life in the mountains if you choose me. And what am I offering? Brielle asked. A girl who buries the dead and has dirt under her fingernails no matter how hard she scrubs? Pierce reached out and took her hand, turning it over to expose her palm. It was work roughened, calloused, the nails short and practical. He traced one finger across her palm, then brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture so tender it made Brielle's eyes sting. You are offering light, he said simply. In a dark world, that is everything. Brielle felt tears spill over, running down her clean cheeks. She could not remember the last time someone had been kind to her, had seen her as anything other than a convenience or an uncomfortable necessity. Pierce pulled her against his chest, wrapping one massive arm around her shoulders, and let her cry herself out against his shirt. When the tears finally stopped, Brielle pulled back and wiped at her face. I must look a mess. You look beautiful, Pierce said, and he meant it. She could see it in his eyes. They stayed by the stream until the sun began to set, talking about small things, learning each other. Pierce told her about his cabin, about the elk and deer he hunted, about the long winters when the snow came up past the windows, and he would go weeks without seeing another human being. Brielle told him about the books she read, borrowed from the few townspeople who would loan them to her, about the garden she tried to keep behind the shack that never quite thrived in the cemetery dirt. When it grew too dark to stay longer, Pierce walked her back to the cemetery. At the edge of the trees, where the first headstones became visible in the twilight, he stopped. I meant what I said, he told her. I will come back for you, 1 month from today, and I will keep coming back for as long as you will let me. I will be here, Brielle said. Pierce cupped her face in both his hands, tilting her head back. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and her heart stuttered with want and fear in equal measure. But instead, he just touched his forehead to hers, a gesture of such intimacy that it felt more profound than any kiss could have been. Clean, he murmured. Beautiful. Light. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness between the trees like a shadow, and Brielle was left standing alone in the cemetery with her heart pounding and her whole body alive with sensation. She went back to her shack and lay in her narrow bed, wearing Pierce's shirt, because she could not bear to take it off yet, and stared at the ceiling. She could still feel where his hands had touched her face, could still smell pine soap on her skin. She fell asleep with a smile on her face for the first time in months. The next 4 weeks were the longest of Brielle's life. She went about her work mechanically, digging graves when they were needed, tending to the cemetery, trying not to count the days. But she counted them anyway. 28 days until Pierce would come back. 25, 20, 15. She cleaned the shack thoroughly, scrubbed the floors and washed the windows and aired out the musty bedding. She bought a new dress with money she could barely afford, a simple thing in gray cotton, but at least it was not stained and worn thin like her other dresses. She washed her hair every 3 days instead of once a week, trying to keep it clean and soft. Mrs. Henderson at the mercantile noticed. "Well," she said, eyeing Brielle with something like approval, "someone has been taking better care of herself." Brielle just smiled and did not answer. She was not ready to share Pierce with anyone yet, not ready to expose this fragile new thing to the gossip and judgment of the town. On the 28th day, Brielle woke before dawn. She dressed in her new gray dress, braided her hair carefully, and tried to calm her racing heart. What if he did not come? What if he had changed his mind, decided she was not worth the journey down from the mountains? What if the whole thing had been some kind of cruel joke? But at noon, just as the sun reached its peak, she saw him. Pierce came walking down the main street of Alamosa with that easy ground-eating stride, pack on his back, rifle slung over his shoulder. He was impossible to miss, a giant among normal-sized men, and Brielle felt her heart swell so large in her chest she thought it might burst. He found her in the cemetery, as she had known he would. She was standing by her uncle's grave, pulling weeds from around the simple wooden marker, and she felt him approach before she heard him. "Brielle," he said, and the way he said her name, soft and reverent, made her turn to face him. He looked the same, gloriously the same, all broad shoulders and muscled arms, and that intense, focused gaze that made her feel like the only person in the world. He was carrying something, she realized, a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Brought you something," he said, holding it out. Brielle took it with trembling hands and unwrapped it to find a dress. It was doeskin, soft as butter, worked to an incredible suppleness and decorated with small beads and patterns of blue and white. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Made it myself," Pierce said, and there was uncertainty in his voice, like he was worried she might not like it. "Thought you might want something that did not show dirt so easy. Buckskin is practical, but wanted it to be pretty too. Like you." "Pierce," Brielle breathed. She could not find more words than that. She held the dress against her chest and felt tears threaten again. "Do you like it?" Pierce asked. "I love it," Brielle said fervently. "It is the most wonderful thing anyone has ever given me." The tension left Pierce's shoulders. He stepped closer, and Brielle tilted her head back to look at him, this impossible man who had walked into her life and turned everything upside down. "Missed you," Pierce said quietly. "Whole month all I could think about was getting back to you, checking that you were real, that I had not dreamed you." "I am real," Brielle said, "and I missed you too." Pierce reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Come walk with me. Want to spend every minute I can with you before I have to go back." They walked for hours, out past the cemetery, along the river that ran south of town, up into the foothills where the air was thin and clean. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in deeper ways. Pierce told her about his childhood in Texas, about a father who drank too much and a mother who died when he was 12, about running away at 15 and making his way west, working as a ranch hand and a buffalo hunter before settling in Colorado, about meeting his wife, Rebecca, when he was 22, how they had 3 years of happiness before she died. "I was angry for a long time," Pierce said, "angry at God, at the world, at myself for not being able to save her. That is why I went into the mountains, to get away from everything that reminded me of what I had lost." "And now?" Brielle asked. Pierce looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Now I think maybe I have been alone long enough. Maybe it is time to try living again." Brielle took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, marveling at how small her hand looked engulfed in his. "I want that too," she said. "I have been existing, not living. You make me want to live." They stopped at a place where the river formed a small pool, clear and deep, surrounded by willows. Pierce pulled food from his pack, jerky and hardtack and dried apples, and they sat by the water and ate. The sun was warm on Brielle's face, and she felt something like contentment settle over her. "Tell me about your cabin," she said. "In the mountains. What's it like?" Pierce's face softened. "Small. One room, but it is enough for me. Built it myself, chinked the logs with clay and moss. Have a stone fireplace that keeps it warm, even in the worst of winter. Furs on the floor, bed in the corner, a bench and a table. Not much, but it is mine." "It sounds wonderful," Brielle said wistfully. It is lonely," Pierce admitted. "Beautiful, but lonely. Been thinking, though, if you were there, it would not be lonely anymore." Brielle's heart skipped. "Are you asking me something?" Pierce turned to face her fully. "Not yet. Too soon. But I am thinking about it. Thinking about what it might be like to have you there, to wake up next to you every morning, to come home from hunting and find you waiting, to not be alone anymore." "I think about it too," Brielle confessed, "about leaving the cemetery, about having a real life with someone who wants me." "I want you," Pierce said fiercely. "Make no mistake about that. I want you so much it scares me. Have not felt this way since Rebecca, and I did not think I ever would again." Brielle leaned forward and kissed him. It was impulsive, brazen, completely unlike her, but she did it anyway. She pressed her lips to his and felt him go still with surprise, then soften, then respond. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, and he kissed her back with a gentleness that belied his size and strength. His lips were warm and firm, and when he pulled back, both of them were breathing hard. "Brielle," Pierce said, his voice rough. "I am sorry," Brielle said. "I should not have." "Do not be sorry," Pierce said. He traced his thumb across her lower lip, and the touch sent sparks shooting through her whole body. "Been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you. Just did not want to rush you." "I'm tired of being patient," Brielle said. "I've been patient my whole life, waiting for things to get better, waiting for someone to see me. You see me, Pierce, and I see you. That is enough." Pierce kissed her again, deeper this time, and Brielle felt herself falling into him. When they finally broke apart, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have to go back tomorrow," Pierce said, and he sounded pained. "But I will be back in another month, and the month after that, for as long as it takes." "As long as what takes?" Brielle asked. "For you to be ready to come with me," Pierce said. "For you to be my wife, if you will have me." Brielle felt tears prick at her eyes. "That is a proposal." "Not yet," Pierce said. "When I propose, it will be proper, with a ring and everything. This is just letting you know what I am thinking, what I am hoping for." "I am hoping for it too," Brielle whispered. They stayed by the river until full dark, then walked back to town hand in hand. Pierce walked her all the way to the shack at the edge of the cemetery, and at the door he kissed her once more, soft and sweet. "1 month," he said. "I will be counting the days," Brielle replied. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the night, and then went inside. She lit the lamp and looked at the doe-skin dress he had given her, running her fingers over the soft leather and intricate beadwork. It must have taken him weeks to make, hours and hours of careful work. For her. She undressed and slipped the dress on. It fit perfectly, hugging her curves in a way her loose cotton dresses never did. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and almost did not recognize the woman looking back. She looked like someone who belonged in the wild places, someone strong and capable, someone worthy of a man like Pierce Oakes. The next month passed in the same slow torture as the first, but this time Brielle had the dress to remind her that Pierce was real, that what was growing between them was real. She wore it while working in the cemetery, not caring that it might get dirty. It was meant to be practical, after all, and Pierce had said so himself. When he came back at the end of the month, she was wearing it, and the look on his face made every minute of waiting worthwhile. "Beautiful," he said, drinking in the sight of her. "Knew you would be beautiful in it." This time he stayed for 3 days, sleeping rough outside of town but spending every daylight hour with Brielle. He helped her with the heavier work in the cemetery, digging graves and moving stones, and watching him work was a revelation. His strength was immense, but he used it carefully, precisely. He never wasted a movement, never showed off. He just did the work and made it look easy. On the second day, they rode out of town on a horse Pierce had bought from the livery, headed up into the mountains so he could show her where he lived. It was a long ride, several hours, climbing steadily into the high country. The air grew thinner and colder, but Brielle did not mind. She sat in front of Pierce on the horse, his arms around her as he controlled the reins, and felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. His cabin was exactly as he had described it, small, simple, but well-built and solid. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a view of the higher peaks to the west. A creek ran nearby, providing fresh water, and there was a small corral for horses and a shed for storing firewood. "This is home," Pierce said, dismounting and then lifting Brielle down like she weighed nothing. "What do you think?" Brielle turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It was isolated, certainly. The nearest neighbor was probably days away, but it was also peaceful, beautiful in a stark way, and she could imagine being happy here. "I think it is perfect," she said. Pierce's face lit up. He took her hand and led her inside. The cabin was neat and clean, everything in its place. The furs on the floor were thick and soft, the bed in the corner piled with blankets. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there were shelves with supplies, hooks for hanging tools and clothing, a table, and 2 chairs. "Built those chairs this past month," Pierce said, pointing. "Only ever had one before, but I was hoping maybe you would come visit, so I needed 2. Brielle felt her heart swell. She looked at this massive, intimidating man and saw the care he was taking, the hope he was allowing himself to have, and she fell a little more in love with him. "Pierce," she said, "I want to say yes. When you ask me, I want to say yes." Pierce crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Then I am asking, Brielle Vance, will you marry me? Will you leave the cemetery and the town and come up here to live with me? I know it is not much. I know it is a hard life, but I swear I will take care of you. I will hunt and fish and keep you warm and safe. I will love you the way you deserve to be loved." Brielle was crying again, but this time they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Pierce kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Brielle kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. "We should do it proper," Pierce said. "Get the preacher to marry us. I want everyone to know you are mine." "I do not care what the town thinks," Brielle said, "but yes, we will do it proper." They rode back to town that evening, and Pierce went straight to the preacher's house. Reverend Walsh was surprised to see the mountain man at his door, even more surprised when Pierce explained what he wanted. "You want to marry the gravedigger's niece?" Reverend Walsh said, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. "Her name is Brielle Vance," Pierce said, his voice hard. "And yes, I want to marry her as soon as possible." "Well, you will need a license, and I suppose we can post the banns. Be married in a few weeks." "Tomorrow," Pierce said flatly. "I want to marry her tomorrow." The Reverend sputtered. "That is highly irregular. There are procedures." Pierce pulled out a leather pouch and dumped gold coins onto the Reverend's desk. "That is for the marriage and for any procedures we need to skip. We will do it tomorrow." The Reverend looked at the gold, then at Pierce's implacable face, and nodded. "Tomorrow afternoon, then." At the church. Pierce went back to Brielle with the news, and she felt a wild joy bubble up inside her. "Tomorrow? We are getting married tomorrow?" "If that is all right with you," Pierce said, could not stand the thought of waiting weeks. "It is more than all right," Brielle said. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, not caring that they were standing in the middle of the cemetery where anyone could see. That night, Brielle packed her few belongings into a small trunk. She did not have much: a few dresses, her uncle's Bible, some books, a quilt her mother had made. But it was enough. Everything she needed was standing outside her door, waiting for her. The next afternoon, Brielle put on the doe-skin dress Pierce had made her and walked to the church. A few townspeople had gathered, drawn by curiosity more than anything else. Mrs. Henderson was there, looking surprised but not unkind. The sheriff came, and a few of the merchants. They watched as Brielle walked down the aisle toward Pierce, who stood at the front in clean clothes, his hair pulled back, looking like some kind of warrior prince. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony quickly and efficiently. Pierce's responses were loud and clear, his "I do" ringing through the small church. When it was Brielle's turn, she looked up at her mountain man and said her vows with her whole heart. "I do." "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Walsh said, sounding slightly overwhelmed by the whole thing. Pierce cupped Brielle's face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly, and there were a few scandalized gasps from the watching townspeople. Brielle did not care. She was married. She was Pierce's wife. She was leaving the cemetery and the death and the loneliness behind and starting a new life. They left Alamosa that evening, riding out as the sun set, headed for the high country. Brielle did not look back. There was nothing in that town she wanted to keep, no one she would miss. Her whole future was sitting behind her on the horse, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. They rode through the night and into the next day, stopping only briefly to rest the horse. When they finally reached Pierce's cabin, it was late afternoon. Pierce dismounted and lifted Brielle down, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "Threshold," he said gruffly. "Supposed to carry you over it." Brielle laughed and wound her arms around his neck as he carried her into the cabin. He set her down gently inside, then closed the door behind them. They were alone. Truly alone, miles from anyone else, and Brielle felt a sudden shyness overtake her. She was married now, and that meant certain things would happen, things she had only the vaguest understanding of. Pierce seemed to sense her nervousness. He took her hands and held them gently. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said. "I can wait. I have waited 10 years. I can wait longer." "I do not want to wait," Brielle said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I want to be your wife in every way. I do not know exactly what to do." Pierce's expression softened. "I will show you, and we will go slow. If you want me to stop at any time, you just say so, all right?" "All right," Brielle whispered. Pierce kissed her then, soft and sweet, and gradually the kiss deepened, grew more heated. His hands moved to the ties of her doe-skin dress, and Brielle let him undress her, let the dress fall to the floor. He stepped back to look at her, and she resisted the urge to cover herself. "Beautiful," Pierce said reverently. "So beautiful." He undressed himself, and Brielle's eyes widened at the sheer size of him, all muscle and scars and masculine strength. He was intimidating, but he was also hers, and she trusted him completely. Pierce took her to the bed and laid her down on the soft furs and blankets, then joined her there. He was careful with her, gentle in a way she had not expected from such a large man. He showed her how bodies could fit together, how pleasure could build and build until it broke over her like a wave. And when it was over, he held her close and stroked her hair and told her she was light, she was beautiful, she was his. Brielle fell asleep in his arms that night and woke the next morning to find him watching her with soft eyes. "Good morning, wife," he said, and Brielle felt a rush of joy so pure it made her dizzy. "Good morning, husband," she replied. They settled into a rhythm over the following weeks and months. Pierce taught Brielle how to survive in the mountains, how to shoot his rifle and set traps and recognize the tracks of different animals. Brielle cooked the meat he brought back from hunting, tended a small garden she started near the cabin, and kept their home clean and comfortable. They were happy in a way that seemed almost too good to be true, like at any moment something would come along to shatter this perfect peace they had found. But nothing did. The months turned into a year, and then 2. Brielle learned to love the isolation, the quiet, the way they could go days without seeing another human being. She learned to love the mountains themselves, the way they changed with the seasons, green and lush in summer, painted in gold and red in fall, buried under snow in winter. And she learned to love Pierce more deeply than she had known was possible. She loved his strength and his gentleness, his fierce protectiveness and his surprising humor. She loved the way he looked at her like she was something precious, the way he touched her with such care and reverence. She loved the quiet moments, sitting by the fire in the evenings, his arm around her shoulders, feeling completely content. It was during their second winter together, when the snow was piled high around the cabin and they were snowed in for weeks at a time, that Brielle realized she was pregnant. She waited to tell Pierce, wanting to be sure, and when she finally did, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He went pale, then flushed, then grabbed her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "A baby," he said, setting her down carefully as though she might break. We are going to have a baby." "In the summer," Brielle said, smiling at his joy. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Pierce cupped her face in his hands. "Brielle, I am the happiest man alive. I thought I would never have this again. A wife, a child, a family. You have given me everything." "You gave me everything first," Brielle said. "You saw me when I was covered in dirt and told me I was light. You washed me clean and made me believe I could be more than just the gravedigger's niece." "You were always more," Pierce said fiercely. "I just helped you see it." The pregnancy was difficult at times, especially in the isolation of the mountains. There was no doctor nearby, no one to help if something went wrong. But Pierce was attentive and careful, and he made sure Brielle rested and ate well. When her time came in late July, he delivered their son himself, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he caught the baby and cut the cord and wrapped the infant in soft furs. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion as he placed the baby in Brielle's arms. A strong, healthy boy. Brielle looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and his shock of dark hair, and felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. "What should we name him?" Pierce thought for a moment. "William," he said, "after my father's father. He was a good man." "William Oakes," Brielle said, testing the name. "I like it." They raised their son in the mountains, and he thrived there, growing strong and healthy in the clean air. When William was 2, Brielle became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin girls. Pierce was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, 2 babies instead of 1, but they managed. They named the girls Sarah and Elizabeth, and they were bright and curious from the beginning, following their older brother everywhere. The years passed and their family grew. Brielle had 2 more children, another boy they named Thomas, and a girl they named Grace. The cabin grew too, Pierce adding on rooms to accommodate their growing family. It was still isolated, still far from civilization, but it was full of life and love and laughter. They made trips down to Alamosa once or twice a year, to trade and buy supplies they could not make themselves. Each time they went, Brielle was struck by how much the town had changed, how much she had changed. She was no longer the cemetery girl covered in dirt, no longer the lonely orphan no one wanted to know. She was Pierce Oakes's wife, the mother of 5 children, a woman who was loved and valued and respected. But she never wanted to stay in town for long. Her heart was in the mountains now, in the cabin with the stone fireplace and the view of the high peaks, with the man who had seen her light when she was buried in darkness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce took Brielle back to the place where he had first washed her in the stream. The children stayed at the cabin with William, who at 8 was old enough to be responsible for a few hours. Pierce and Brielle walked through the forest hand in hand, and when they reached the clearing, Brielle felt a rush of memory so strong it made her breath catch. "I think about that day sometimes," Pierce said, standing by the stream where the water still tumbled clear and cold over smooth stones. "The day I brought you here and washed you clean. The day I told you that you were light." "I think about it too," Brielle said. "It was the day my life really started." Pierce pulled her into his arms and held her close. "I was so scared that day, scared you would think I was crazy, scared you would reject me, but I had to try. Had to show you what I saw when I looked at you." "What do you see now?" Brielle asked, pulling back to look up at him. Pierce smiled, the rare, brilliant smile that made him look years younger. "I see the same thing. Light, but brighter now, stronger. I see the woman I love, the mother of my children, the person who made me whole again." "You made me whole too," Brielle said. "I was broken before you, Pierce, covered in dirt and death, thinking I would never have more than that. You showed me I could have everything." "We showed each other," Pierce said. He kissed her then, deep and sweet, and they stood there by the stream for a long time, holding each other, grateful for the miracle of finding each other in a world that had been so unkind to both of them. They raised their children to be strong and self-sufficient, to love the mountains and respect the wilderness. William grew into a tall, capable young man who could hunt and track as well as his father. The twins, Sarah and Elizabeth, were inseparable, bright and curious girls who loved to explore. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, always watching and learning. And Grace, the baby, was fierce and fearless, afraid of nothing. When William turned 18, he announced that he wanted to go down to Alamosa, to see more of the world than just their mountains. Pierce was hesitant, protective as always, but Brielle convinced him to let their son go. "He needs to make his own choices," she said, "just like we did." So William went, and he came back 3 months later with a young woman at his side, a banker's daughter named Mary, who was sweet and kind and completely overwhelmed by the wilderness but willing to try. They were married that fall, and Pierce added on another room to the cabin. The years continued to pass, bringing changes but also continuity. Sarah and Elizabeth both married mountain men like their father, strong, capable men who could handle the isolation and the hard work. Thomas decided he wanted to be a doctor and went east to study, breaking Brielle's heart a little but making her proud beyond measure. Grace, true to form, refused to get married, said she was happy living in the mountains and helping her parents. Pierce grew older, his dark hair turning gray and then white, his body still strong but moving a little slower. Brielle grew older too, her face lined with wrinkles, but her eyes still bright, her smile still quick. They sat together on the porch Pierce had built onto the front of the cabin, watching their grandchildren play in the clearing, and felt nothing but gratitude for the life they had built. "Do you ever regret it?" Pierce asked one evening as the sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Leaving the town, coming up here with me?" Brielle took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Not for a single moment. This is where I belong. With you." "You saved me," Pierce said quietly. "That day in the cemetery when I saw you digging that grave. I was so lonely I did not even realize it anymore. Thought I would live alone and die alone, and that would be that. But there was something about you, something that called to me." "We saved each other," Brielle corrected. "I was dying slowly in that cemetery, Pierce. Dying inside while I buried everyone else. You brought me back to life." Pierce brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, the same gesture he had made on that first day by the stream. "You were always alive. You were always light. I just helped you see it." "And you were always good," Brielle said. "Even when you thought you were broken beyond repair. I saw it in you from the beginning." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished setting and the stars began to come out one by one until the sky was filled with them. Their grandchildren had been called inside by their parents, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the various cabins that now dotted the clearing, a little community of their own making. "I love you," Pierce said, as he had said every day for more than 30 years. "My Brielle, my light." "I love you too," Brielle replied, as she had replied every day for more than 30 years. "My Pierce, my mountain man, the one who washed me clean and showed me I could be more than I ever dreamed." They went inside as the night grew cold, and Pierce banked the fire while Brielle prepared for bed. They had grown old together, had built a life together, had raised a family together in these mountains they both loved. And when they climbed into bed that night, Pierce pulled Brielle against his chest the way he always did, and they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content and complete. Years later, when they were both very old, Pierce fell ill. It was pneumonia, brought on by a harsh winter, and even Brielle's nursing and Thomas's medical knowledge, when he came rushing home from back east, could not save him. He died peacefully in his sleep, Brielle holding his hand, all their children and grandchildren gathered around. Brielle grieved, as she had known she would, but there was peace in it too. They had had so many years together, so much love, so much joy. She had been blessed beyond measure. She lived for 5 more years after Pierce died, staying in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Grace never left her side, and William visited often with his growing family. The twins came when they could, and Thomas made the journey from back east twice a year. When Brielle's time came, she went peacefully, sitting in the rocking chair Pierce had made for her, looking out at the mountains she had come to love so much. Her last thought was of the day Pierce had taken her to the stream and washed her clean, the day he had told her she was light. And in the end, that is what she had been. Light in the darkness, hope in despair, love in loneliness. She had been the gravedigger's niece covered in dirt, and he had been the mountain man who washed her clean and showed her she was so much more. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren told stories about them for generations, about the cemetery girl and the mountain man who fell in love and built a life together in the high country of Colorado, about how he had seen her light when no one else could, and how she had saved him from his loneliness. about the family they built and the love they shared, a love that lasted until their final breaths and beyond. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from the peaks and the stars came out one by one, people said you could still feel their presence in those mountains, still feel the strength of the love they had shared. The gravedigger's niece and her mountain man, together forever in the wild places they had called home. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, in the cabins that dotted the clearing, in the stories passed down from parent to child. They had started with nothing but each other, just two broken people who found wholeness together. And they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. Brielle was buried next to Pierce in a small cemetery they had created on their land, overlooking the high peaks they both loved. Their headstone was simple, carved by William's own hands. It read, "Pierce and Brielle Oakes, he saw her light, she showed him home, together forever." And in the end, that was the truest thing that could be said about them. They had found each other in the darkness, two souls who needed healing, who needed love, who needed to be seen. And they had given each other everything, built a life together that was rich and full despite its hardships, raised a family that carried their love forward into the future. The cemetery in Alamosa still existed, and sometimes travelers passing through would hear the story of the gravedigger's niece, the girl covered in dirt who had seemed destined for loneliness and isolation. And they would hear about the mountain man who came down from the high country and saw past the dirt to the light underneath, who loved her and married her and took her away to a life of freedom and joy in the mountains. It became a legend of sorts in that part of Colorado, a story about finding love in unexpected places, about being seen for who you truly are beneath whatever masks or armor you wear, about the transformative power of love, how it can take someone broken and make them whole, how it can take someone lost and show them the way home. The cabin Pierce built still stood decades later, maintained by their descendants, a testament to the life they had built together. And on summer evenings, when the light slanted golden through the pines and the creek ran cold and clear nearby, you could almost see them there, young again, Pierce washing Brielle clean in the stream, telling her she was light, promising her a future neither of them had dared to dream of before they found each other. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and grief and the natural passing of time. But it was a happy ending nonetheless, because they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy of family and love that would endure for generations. They had been given a second chance at happiness, had seized it with both hands, building something beautiful from the ashes of their separate sorrows. Brielle had spent her childhood and young adulthood among the dead, believing she was destined for darkness. But Pierce had shown her the truth, that she had always carried light within her, and that light had only grown brighter as the years passed. She had gone from being the lonely cemetery girl to being the beloved matriarch of a large, thriving family, from feeling worthless to knowing without doubt that she was precious and valued and deeply loved. And Pierce, who had hidden in the mountains for so long, nursing his grief and loneliness, had found his way back to life through loving Brielle. She had given him a reason to come down from the high country, a reason to risk his heart again, and in doing so had given him everything he thought he had lost forever: love, family, purpose, home. Their love story was not complicated or dramatic in the way of some romances. There were no grand gestures or epic obstacles to overcome beyond their own damaged hearts and the harsh realities of frontier life. But it was real, and deep, and lasting. It was the kind of love that sustained through hard winters and difficult years, the kind that grew stronger rather than weaker with time, the kind that left behind something meaningful and permanent. On the headstone in their small family cemetery, beneath their names and the words about light and home, William had carved one more line, something his mother had said often in her final years, something she had wanted remembered. The line read, "We were broken. Together we became whole." And that, in the end, was the heart of their story. Two people damaged by life, by loss, by loneliness, who found each other and discovered that together they were complete. The gravedigger's niece, covered in dirt, washed clean by her mountain man's love, shown that she was light and always had been. And the mountain man, isolated and grieving, brought back to life by the cemetery girl who saw past his wildness to the good man underneath. Their children grew old telling their own children about Pierce and Brielle, about how they met and fell in love, about the life they built in the mountains. And those children told their children, and so the story was passed down, generation after generation, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the person who saves you is the one who needs saving just as much. The mountains where they lived remained wild and beautiful, largely unchanged by the passage of time. Their descendants still lived there, still hunted and trapped and raised their families in the old ways, still told stories around the fire on cold winter nights. And the story they told most often, the one that never got old, was the story of Pierce and Brielle, the mountain man and the cemetery girl, who found each other and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. In the grand scheme of things, they were just two people, their lives small and contained, affecting only their immediate family and the few people who knew them. But to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they were everything. They were the foundation on which the whole family was built, the example of what love should be, the proof that no matter how dark life gets, there is always the possibility of light. Brielle had been right all those years ago when she told Pierce that they had saved each other. Neither of them would have survived alone, not really. They would have existed, gone through the motions of living, but they would not have truly lived. It was only together that they became whole, became fully themselves, became the people they were always meant to be. And so their story ended not with tragedy or loss, but with fulfillment and peace. They had lived long lives, loved deeply, raised a family, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? What more could anyone hope for than to find the person who sees your light even when you are covered in darkness, who washes you clean, not just physically but spiritually and emotionally, who loves you not despite your brokenness but through it and beyond it? Pierce and Brielle Oakes found that with each other, and they held onto it with both hands, nurturing it and protecting it and letting it grow into something beautiful and lasting. And when they died knowing they had been blessed, knowing they had found something rare and precious, knowing that their love would continue on in their children and their children's children, a legacy that would never truly die. In the end, that is immortality. Not living forever yourself, but creating something that outlasts you, building something that continues after you are gone. Pierce and Brielle did that through their family, through their love, through the story of how they found each other and chose each other and built a life together against all odds. The gravedigger's niece and the mountain man. She was covered in dirt. He washed her clean. He told her she was light, and she believed him. And together they created something beautiful that lasted long after they were both gone, a testament to the power of love to heal, to transform, to make whole what was broken. Their story ended as all good stories should, with love triumphant, with family gathered close, with a life well lived and a love well loved. They began in darkness and ended in light, and everything in between was worth it for the joy they found in each other. The cemetery girl and her mountain man, together forever, in life and in death and in the memories of those who loved them. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, in a small clearing surrounded by pines, their spirits still linger, still love, still remind anyone who listens that no matter how dirty you feel, how broken you are, how lost you have become, there is always the possibility of being washed clean, of finding your light, of coming home.